run through the issue regarding the zero-day researchers, and hopefully it'll be enough to give you some background so you can understand what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. So the general problem here is that we've got a bunch of members, and also there's a lot of non-members that are involved in vulnerability research. So they're paid to look for flaws in software that they can then, or actually potentially hardware as well, that they can advise the vendors so that the problem can be fixed. And the way that they fix it is by issuing what's called a patch. So a zero-day vulnerability is one where the vulnerability exists, but there is not yet a patch in existence. Or alternatively, there's another definition that's a vulnerability that hasn't yet been discovered. But I prefer the first definition, although for all practical purposes, the effect is the same, that whether they know about it or not, if there's no patch available, then it means that the system is vulnerable. And some of the worst attacks that we've seen in the last few years, such as the SolarWinds attack at the beginning of the year, the Microsoft Exchange Server attack, I think the Kaseya hack that occurred last month or earlier this month, all involved zero-day vulnerabilities. So from the standpoint of cybersecurity professionals, it's really in our interests that those guys that are doing the important discovery work don't feel that they've got some legal exposure that might put a chill on their efforts. So typically the threats come to the zero-day researchers from vendors that don't feel comfortable with the fact that there are people out there trying to find holes in their products, even though ultimately it's for the good of the product as well, that the problems can be found and patched. The consequences of having unpatched software out there is that it means that all the users of that software, and they could be hundreds of thousands, and there could be hundreds of thousands of users, are all exposed to cyber attack because the vendor or the provider of this critical software isn't minded to do the right thing. Now, I'm sure the vendors might have another view on that. There are issues around stability. And there was a case last year, we discovered 24 different vulnerabilities within the software that universities were using to remotely monitor students in their exams during COVID. So the issue there was that we found some vulnerabilities there, but they'd been unpatched for 8 or 12 years. And the vendor, I think was aware of these vulnerabilities, but there are issues like the stability of software. Once you get software stable so that it runs happily on a platform, sometimes making changes, even updating software, can cause instability issues. So I suspect, although I don't know for sure, that part of the reticence is around just the introducing of unstable variations to a platform that might be running well, even though it's insecure. So I guess trying to take a balanced view, that's sort of the one of the reasons why I could imagine vendors might be reticent. Another is simply just maybe they don't like people poking around inside their proprietary systems. Although, of course, the difference is that with a white hat researcher, an ethical sort of zero-day researcher, they're doing it so that they can advise the company and hopefully get paid a reward, a bounty. The black hat actors, maybe nation state attackers, are going to be doing the same thing. They're looking for vulnerabilities in software as well, but they're not going to be disclosing those to anyone other than perhaps their criminal counterparts. So in the final analysis, the vulnerabilities are going to be found one way or another. And we just think it's in the public interest that those that are prepared to find and responsibly disclose the vulnerabilities are not subject to the threat of legal action. Now, there's two main heads of liability that arise if you do this kind of work. One is under copyright law, and the issue there is the way that some places in the world regulate copyright. It's technically a breach to go and reverse engineer, look inside of software, even if it's for noble purposes. So the legal actions that have been brought against vulnerability researchers are sometimes brought under copyright law, which is a civil offence. Alternatively, the criminal offence provisions that govern unauthorised access to computer systems might be invoked, and that will depend on the jurisdiction. Sometimes they will threaten them with both actions, copyright action and also potentially criminal charges for unlawful interference with their systems or software. So as you can see, that's not a good thing, and we're going to try and get that changed. So how are we going to do that? Well, the OECD released a report at the beginning of the year, a discussion paper, or actually it was a set of guidelines for policymakers, including lawmakers, that set out the issues, and it's a really, really fine piece of policy research. We understand now that there were 90 people involved in the production of that work over 18 months, so it's an excellent paper, which I would commend to you. It goes through all the background to the issues, what the implications are, and finally comes down with some recommendations. But of course, the OECD is really a policy body, they're not a legislative body. And so our aim is to pick that work up and use that as a foundation so that we can go ahead and approach the respective lawmakers in our respective jurisdictions to see whether we can get the laws changed to provide what is sometimes known as a safe harbour or a legal immunity for these researchers. So that's effectively what our aim is. And the way that we want to do that is through a coalition. So we've already started talking with the Cyber Peace Foundation, and we've had a discussion now with the Working Group 6 from the so-called Paris Call that has undertaken to establish a set of principles. They've already done that. The Paris Call are actually the principles that they call on for all players in cyberspace to respect. But the other thing is that they're looking at work streams within each working group where they're looking at practical measures to empower the participating nations so that they can meet the aims under the Paris Call. So these are very highly qualified, well-positioned people that are very excited about this idea that we've taken to them. And we've also talked to Kieran Martin, who was formerly the chief cybersecurity official in the UK, and his counterpart, Chris Painter, formerly from the White House in the US, both of whom have expressed in varying degrees support for the project. I'd say Kieran more than Chris, but Chris has not ruled out his support. So that's where we stand. So the initiative now going forward is that I've undertaken to produce a one-pager, a document that sets out the aims of the campaign and the issues in some very high level description, and then perhaps a scoping study so that we can scope out a work plan that we would then go and seek funding for so that we can actually implement the work. And the next step is I want to advise the CyAN members, and you guys can help through the social media to let them know and to let the broader community know that we're undertaking this important initiative. I think it's fair to say that we are leading this, or with Cyber Peace Institute. You might think we'd be more correct in saying we're a co-sponsor of these efforts. Anyway, that's probably all I can give you for now at a high level. I hope that's clear. Feel free to shoot me back some questions, or maybe we can discuss at another time. Okay, guys, so that's it from me, and I'll look forward to talking to you about this soon. Great work that you're doing for us. This is just another thing that we can push out there to help engage and to grow in the membership.